All right, so hello everyone. We are Blacklight Studios, the game pre-production team for this semester. I'm Brandon, the producer on the team. Our faculty instructors are Chris Klug and Ricardo Washington, and here is our team. So we created a tactical role-playing game with a unique plague mechanic. You play as a disciple of the Dark One, trying to defeat the High Priest to secure his rule on Earth. Our target demographic is young adult gamers who have experience with the genre. So before we get more into what we have created, I want to address the issue with the subject matter of our game. Most likely, our game would have been either delayed or outright canceled due to the subject matter with the state of the world that we are currently in. If we had the foresight to predict everything that would happen this semester, we absolutely would have chosen a different game and mechanic entirely. Once the world went into the state of quarantine due to the virus, and we received feedback about misgivings people had about our game, we sat down amongst ourselves and our advisors to discuss next steps. We ultimately decided to finish the game we initially set out to create due to time constraint. We were already so late into a semester that we could not afford to pivot our setting and mechanic, as we'd already spent most of our time designing around the plague, creating the environment and characters that are inspired by real world religion, and built mechanics into our gameplay demo that showcase these elements. Simply put, we would not have been able to fully create our pre-production package if we would have pivoted. With that being said, here's what we are delivering as part of our pre-production package. A gameplay demo of how our gameplay loop and plague mechanic feels that serves as a groundwork for the experience the next team will build. An art package that showcases all environments and characters that will be featured in the experience that we anticipate will be built, alongside lighting and material exploration. Code documentation that serves as a guideline for future programmers to easily understand our code base and to allow them to quickly build on. And design documentation that describes all design decisions we made, from mechanics to UX and UI. Our three most important metrics that we focused on during this project were documentation, prototyping, and gameplay/interactivity. Now I'll go a bit into how we chose our story and setting for our experience. We were given the 14th century France, specifically the Black Plague pandemic, by our advisors as a starting point for us to work in, as it is a rich period historically that rarely gets covered in the video game medium. I spent the first couple weeks researching historical events, important figures, and clashing factions at the time for inspiration for our game. Eventually, we came to the decision of dialing it back to a good versus evil story, or the player plays the evil side simply due to scope concerns. We chose to play the evil side because controlling the plague makes more sense if you're evil, and players like to play the bad guy in games often, as it gives them a role that is vastly different from their real world lives. Since our game is a tactics game and is only an iceberg of what a full experience would be that focuses on the climax level, we wanted players to spend almost all their time engaged with the gameplay. We wanted to choose a story that could be delivered with a few lines of dialogue, as we wanted to focus primarily on tactical gameplay over dialogue and cutscenes during this semester. I will now hand it over to Andrew to talk more about our design process.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm Andrew, one of our team's game designers. Our design process consisted of research, designing mechanics, and playtesting, both internal and external. Our weekly sprints were formatted where playtesting looped back into identifying the problem or brainstorming. Most of the research we did happened before halves, but we performed more research on UX/UI design to learn more about how to make our prototype more user-friendly. The two biggest problems we dealt with was game balancing to avoid the dominant strategy of hit and run, or in our case, infect and run, and having a rigid UI that withheld information and limited exploration. We gave our Plague Doctor unit additional abilities beyond simply being able to infect others with the plague to increase engagement and help move away from the dominant strategy. Those abilities being Plague Harvest and Corpse Explosion. We ran internal playtests to try out our ideas for units and their abilities, and after the transition to remote work, we used Tabletop Simulator to continue our internal playtesting. Every unit created and all of the important gameplay systems have design documents that detail our vision for the future of the game. After design documents were proofread, we created test case documents to provide a list of conditions that, when met, proves that the system is working properly. These can be rechecked after something new is implemented or something has been changed to find possible bugs. Now Yang will talk about playtesting.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm Yang, the other game designer on the team. Playtesting also plays an important part in our design process, and it provides us with essential immediate feedback on our design and allows us to pivot our design at the earliest possible time. Now I'll walk you through all our playtests and show you how we iterate our design based on our playtests. We did our first and second round of playtests with our paper prototype, and the purpose of a playtest was to get a rough idea if the core game mechanics were fun to players, and if the plague mechanics were central to the experience, if the new mechanics were valid. We did the playtest by building a tutorial level in our paper prototype and observed players' tactics and experience, and asked them a few questions on site after their playing experience. As the summary of the initial playtest, 10 players tested the game etc at Han Library, We find out that players enjoy the game, but some of them thought the game could be more challenging and found they were adopting a dominant strategy during the experience. Hence, we made some decisions, including we removed non-plague related units, and we updated the AI rules to make the game more challenging. We built more open-ended maps so that the previous dominant strategy wouldn't be as effective. After halves, the digital version was ready, and we moved on to playtesting with the digital prototype. The original plan was to have the paper prototype playtest running at the same time to test our new mechanics and designs, but due to current circumstances, we have to rely heavily on our digital one and do our playtesting online. And in our third round playtest, we want to test if the user interface will helpful for players, if the play mechanics were intuitive, and if there's still a dominant strategy, and how do players enjoy the game. We gather feedback by a follow-up survey online after the players' playing experience. 15 players tested the game in all, and the majority who did not finish the game found the game not enjoying, so the user interface was the main issue. But on the other hand, with new units and terrains introduced into the game, the issue of the dominant strategy was solved, as you can see from the graph in the bottom right corner. Various tactics were adopted during players' experience. Hence, we decided to work on UX/UI design based on the specific feedback we gathered from the playtest. Later, with some UX/UI design problems solved, we started our fourth round playtest trying to validate some assumptions to test if the UI was more helpful for players. To know better answers to our questions, we embedded data collection into the game and answered less ambiguous questions in the survey. 6 players tested our game online. One of the assumptions we had is that we want to test if the data we collected, including the playing time and the units killed in the game, were relevant to how players enjoy the game. However, it turns out they have little connections. But on the other hand, we found out that by explaining our questions better, the R-squared value for the regression between the answer almost doubled, which could be useful for conducting a more effective and accurate playtest in the future. And the results still show that there were rooms for more UI improvements. Hence, we decided we would remain focused on UX/UI design for the remainder of the semester, including camera movement, camera snapping, also where and when should the interface be presented to the players. And as for the results of our design, we have the index document for reference for the next semester team to have a better idea of the structure of our design and can easily locate where these documents are. And speaking of design documents, we have them in the archive with iteration notes included. The design documents covers all aspects of the game, including UX/UI design, best combat rules, unit classes, AI, and the level design. And last but not least, we have detailed playtest summaries in the archive of future teams reference. Now I hand it to Edmund to talk more about character art.
Thank you, Yang. So hi, I'm Edmund. I'm one of the artists in the team. And we're talking about characters here. And because we have already set for a 14th century France as a background, we will look for references on how people will be dressing and equipping back then. So we use those references, pull inspirations from them, and start making sketches of designs. We eventually pick whatever design we think fits and we like. We give it color, see how it may look in the final render. And once the design is set, we move on to a model sheet, which is on the right side here, you can see. It's a plague doctor. We made the model sheet for the next team to build models, and also we document other design details for them to look at and reference. This is doctor, and the next slide is the high priest using the same procedure. You can see the sketches and colors mark up here. And the next one is the swish guard. You can see the reference here, same procedure. Next one is the archer, which is based on the swish guard, but wearing leather instead of plate armor. And the gargoyle, it's still the same procedure. You can see the sketches and colors and a model sheet. And this is one of the minions of the dark one and also the player. Next one, this one would be the ranged version of that minion. And that's about characters. Let's have Min talk about environments.
Okay, thanks, Edmund. Hi, I'm Min. I'm the environment artist on the team. So for environment art, we started from research. We collected hundreds of references to create our mood board. And then we explored the world setting using these dirty and quick sketches. And after we decided to focus on the Cathedral Hall environment, we did more detailed sketches of the decoration. We experimented with different decoration styles to find the best direction to head towards. And after we are settled for this basic layout and decoration style, we created a gray box model and several base materials. We did a bunch of testing in Unity. We tested our materials, lighting, and camera movement. We also put our character designs into the scene to see if they stand out from the background environment. And after those testing, we focused on creating our final concept art. This is the iteration process of this concept art. So you can say based on the feedback, we iterated on the composition, scale, color palette, and also the layout of furniture. We want to make sure that we can convey an accurate overall feeling of this environment through this concept art. We also recorded our exploration and conclusion in our 16 pages long art documentation, and we will pass this to the next team. And next, I will hand it to Tyler to talk about our programming.
Thank you so much, Min. So programming this semester was focused for a good chunk of time on the prototypes and the rapid testing of design principles thought up by our designers. We wanted to very quickly be able to test our prototypes on platforms so we can see how the design principles feel actually once they're in the game in the digital format that players would be experiencing the game on. We also put a lot of time into developing our combat prototype, our gameplay prototype. So we felt it was very important to be able to hand this off to next semester's team as one of our deliverables so that they can see exactly how the gameplay would work on platform and get an idea for how that actually feels in game. Another important part of programming this semester was the documentation. The code itself is well organized and well commented. Basically, any programmer who is familiar with Unity and C# should be able to sit down, look at the code, read through the comments, and be able to tell exactly what is happening where, and be able to follow the overall structure of the code, and be able to figure out where issues are arising when they try and scale up their own code. We also are providing a class diagram, which shows the overall architecture of the code, and this will be very useful for next semester's team kind of figuring the more complex operations that involve communication between multiple classes. So now I'm going to hand it back off to Brandon to do a quick wrap up for you guys.
Thank you, Tyler. So here's what we ultimately learned as a team about pre-production. We believe that it was a mistake for us to pick a genre for a game before anything else. It severely limited our creativity for our design. We picked the plague to be our major mechanic, and we should have tried creating plague-focused experiences to find out what works best with our core idea. Instead, we set out to initially create a tactics game that focused on the plague as a unique mechanic. The issue here is that we spent almost half of our semester building up the core systems for a tactics game before we tested the plague mechanic digitally. Since we chose a tactics strategic game, we wanted to make sure we were setting up for the next team for success, since the Exodus team last year, who built a strategy game, were not able to fully deliver the experience given them by their pre-production team due to vast overscoping in the pre-production package. We were so focused on preventing that, we essentially ended up starting production in the gameplay during pre-production. We spent our second half of the semester focusing on iterating our gameplay demo, which is very far in development. However, this focus on building these core systems made us neglect some aspects of pre-production, such as a full white box prototype and exploration of our core idea and our gameplay. With that being said, thank you to our advisors and everyone who helped us playtest. We are Blacklight Studios. Thank you all for your time, and we are now open for questions.
All right, great.